Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, March 28th, and you're joining me here on Morning Light. Well, today we're going to continue in our work indeed. We started in Colossians 3 and verse 17 and 23 on Monday, and hopefully you're reading through that and you're finding your way through just to do everything for the glory of God. God says whatever it is in work or deed, whether that's cleaning a toilet, whether that's the CEO of a major company, whether that's a secretary, a teacher, whatever it is that you're doing, God says do it for the glory to Him. I was reading in Romans 12 the other day and found this verse. It's also in out of the Message Bible, so it's paraphrased from Eugene Peterson. It says, chapter 12, verse 1. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out, readily recognizing what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops wealth for maturity in you. That three verses there is packed full of how God wants us to live. I love how plain and simple it is. It says, take your everyday, your ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and just walking around and place it before God as an offering. So that really got me thinking of, we give our tithes and offerings in church on Sunday or online, however you give that. And do you give your life as an offering, just like you were passing the plate? Do you hand up your life to God and say, here it is, Lord, I want to give you my best? So many times I think we give God our leftovers. I've been guilty of this myself, of getting up in a rush in the morning. I didn't spend any time with God. And then at the end of the night, as I'm hitting the pillow, I'm just saying quick prayers of bless this, bless that, be with that person, thank you. And off to sleep I go. And I spent not any time, quality time with God at all. And so I wanted to just touch on this verse, especially today. I know we came out of Colossians, but again, that was in Romans 12, out of the Message Bible. Placing your everyday life, everything you do. It could be washing dishes and mopping the floor. Would you place that before God as an offering? Remember yesterday we talked about the audience of one and what that looks like. Do you tend to play to the people or the people around you? Do you play to someone to give you kudos and applause or a pat on the back? Or do you play to the Lord in a sense where you're just giving whatever you do to the Lord? Now, yesterday we talked about some rough and tumble times what does it look like when God asks you to do something not so lovely, when it's hard, when no one's for you, no one is coming alongside you. In the next 3 days, today, tomorrow, and Friday, I want to talk about the story in Nehemiah. So many of you may know it. One of my favorite stories. He was a government worker at the time, and his co-worker was going to be Ezra. God calls him to build the walls around Jerusalem. Now, the temple had been rebuilt about a year ago, but then the walls were in ruin. There was fire. Some of it says it was just in rubble, and it was still smoldering. It had been destroyed, and God calls Nehemiah to build this wall. Well, like so many of us, God may call you to something, but when we get that calling, we're excited. We think, oh, I'm going to work for the Lord. But so many times once you dig in and get busy, you'll find that many will come against you. You will have opposition. Maybe all the supplies won't be there. Maybe there will be some need, definitely some wants. So what is it that God has called you personally to? Maybe it's a ministry. Maybe it's to a marriage. Maybe it's to a calling to children. Whatever that is, whatever your job is. And I just want to touch base real quick here that the secular and the sacred so many times have been separated. And in the Bible, that is not how God intended it. When we think of sacred, we think of the pastors, the teachers, ministers, and we think, well, if I just am a plumber or an electrician or a janitor, that isn't holy work. And that is not true. Everywhere throughout the Bible, we see that God calls those average people to be called into something beautiful for him and to make something for him. Think of Jesus. He was a carpenter. I added just a list of people that we can read about in the Bible. Think about, they were gardeners, shepherds, they were military people, there were politicians, carpenters, of course, tent makers, homemakers, and fishermen. And God chose these people to do great and mighty things. It was not the Pharisees. It was not the religious people that God chose to do his miracles through at times. So don't feel like if you're not doing something, let's say, that's in the church, or it doesn't have a big title to it, that you're not important. God took the least of people and made them very important and worked for him. So I just wanted to touch base on that, because I know sometimes people think that they're less than if they don't have a huge calling with a comma and a religious connotation behind it. So you can be a homemaker and be the most holiest homemaker of all, and God could be using you for glory to him. So I want to just pick up real quick, and I touch base today on Nehemiah. We'll start it today and then we'll finish out Thursday and Friday. But something after God called Nehemiah to do a job, and I want you to think about this too. That he listened. First of all, first and foremost, he listened to what God had for him. Then he prayed. He said, God, show me, what is it you want me to do? He also assessed the situation, and he realized, he went out on his own and he realized it was not a good situation. God may be calling you into something that you're like, God, are you sure you called the right person? Because this is not really a good thing. And God may say, yeah, I have the exact person I need to do this. Once he assessed it and God gave him that calling, he sat down, he wept over the situation. Maybe you're called to something and you feel like crying and going, God, are you sure? Yes, it's okay to cry. He prayed and he fasted over the situation. So I want to be honest about that, because so many times when God calls us, we think, oh, God's called me into something great. And we think, oh, it's got to be a glorious plan. Well, sometimes it becomes very messy, and we're going to find out about that with Nehemiah. So he listened to God, he sat, he prayed, he fasted, he even wept over the situation, and he assessed it, but then he got busy. And that's what I want to touch on today. And then he completed his work, and we'll finish that Thursday and Friday. He got busy working, and there's some fascinating stories about him and his workers, how the enemy would come in and try to deter them. And one verse says that they had one hand on the tool and one hand on their weapons, their swords. So you may be in a battle of your life. You may be in a battle to complete something that God has called you. Maybe you have wayward teenagers and you know you're called to be a stay-at-home mom or working mom, or parents that are like, God, I am losing this battle here. He says, no. You keep working and you keep your hand on the message, his word. That is your weapon. That's the sword. And you keep your hand toiling. Whatever it is, God has you in that place of a divine appointment. And that's important to know, because so many times we think, we spin our lives around going, God, what is it you had for me? Many, many times there is a time of just long suffering. There's a time of patience. There's a time of just going through the process. The grit and the grind of everyday life is so many times where we get discouraged and think, God, this is not what you had for me. It cannot be. Time after time throughout the Bible, there are people that God uses to just show us what everyday life, like we read about in Romans 12, take that everyday, ordinary life and place it before God as an offering and give it up to him. And that's when we will see God do amazing things with our life. It may take years though, friends, to come to fruition, to see that, but give God time to work it out through you. So we're going to talk about Nehemiah, especially tomorrow and Friday, but I wanted to touch on him today because if you want to get a head start, get into the book of Nehemiah. It's in the Old Testament. It's way back it's tucked in a little chapter, and it just talks about the rebuilding of the wall around Jerusalem and how he was faced with opposition. And just a little hint into tomorrow, there was Sanballat and Tobiah, and they tried to bring him down off the wall. Those were his enemies, and they were very intimidated by him. And they said, come on down, we want to talk to you. And I love the verse that says, I'm doing a great work for the Lord. I don't have time for you. There's somebody out there today that needs to hear that you got to stay busy. Stopping for those people that are barking in your ear. I always talk about FloJo. For those of you that are as old as I am or remember, she was the great Olympian. She was a phenomenal runner. And I read a quote one time that she said, "If I stopped for all the barking dogs, I never would have finished my race." I think that is so, so true. In a day and age where something can be chirping in your ear, in your phone, on your social media at all times, saying, "Stop and look at me, stop and look at me, come back," and take you away from your work, it's going to take discipline for you to stay in it, stay to the grind, keep your hand on the tool and your hand in the word, which is your weapon of warfare, because there's going to be plenty of times that the enemy's going to come against you and try to deter you. I cannot tell you, one of the greatest things that the enemy has tried to defeat me with has been with distraction. He will create the greatest form of distraction to take you away from your work. If I could encourage you today to just think about that word, look around. What is distracting you today? It could be discouragement. It could be despair. It could be fear. It could be other people saying, "Oh, come with me. I've got another plan. Hey, let's go shopping today." If God called you to be in the Word today, if God called you to minister to your husband today, if God called you to go do something for somebody else today, don't take it up so quick on the offer, because it very well could be a beautifully orchestrated distraction from the enemy. So be mindful. And Nehemiah, we're going to talk about that tomorrow, where he realizes and he says, "I realize totally what you guys were up against, what you're doing." The enemy came, sent 4 messages to him and said, "Come on down off that wall. Let's talk about what you're doing. I kind of can see what you're doing." And he said, "No way." He said, "I'm going to stay here and be about the Lord's work." So we're going to continue in our series this week on our work indeed. We started off in Colossians 3, verse 17 and 23. Get in that if you haven't read it or if you're just catching this new. And then Nehemiah today, Thursday, and Friday. So have a great Wednesday. It's spring. I hear it's supposed to be about 60 degrees out there. Balmy little humidity. Feels like it's out there from all the rain we got. So have a great Wednesday. It's hump day for those of you that are working. We're almost to Good Friday. So if you get a chance this weekend, watch The Passion of the Christ. It does your soul so much good to realize the truth of what Jesus went through as he was crucified. Love you guys. Have a great Wednesday. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.